Well, that is by far my favorite part of all of this personally, is hearing how customers are using and benefiting from open compute. And so I thank our panelists for talking through that. Last but not least, I would like to introduce my peer from Facebook who has the awesome job of connecting the world, and he is responsible for the network at Facebook, Najim Ahmad, and a panel of thought leaders from the networking space. So Najim, come on up.
Hey, Frank.
Hey, thanks, man.
Hello, everybody. Network sort of has been missing from the OCP for a long time, but in the last 9 months, we spent a lot of time investing in networking technologies in the OCP as well. Today, I'm really excited about the panel we have lined up for you. If you wanted to know what the network might look like in 5 years from now, this is it. How we get there, this is it. I also have the distinct pleasure of hosting a set of guys who are actually driving the transition in the network space. And so I'm really excited about listening to their views as well. So without a whole lot of delay, Dave Maltz from Microsoft. Great. Martin Casado from VMware. Hey, Mark. Matthew Liste from Goldman Sachs. And last but not least, Jared Rivers from Cumulus Networks. So guys, thanks for being here. The topic we wanted to talk about, that the network industry, especially in the data center world, is going through a massive transition. I get that question from pretty much everybody. What does that look like? Where are we going? What are the right set of technologies? So I wanted to kind of hear your views on what does the network look like in 3 to 5 years time frame, and what are the technologies we will be using, how we think we configure it, manage it, what are the big problems we're going to solve. I want to start with you, Dave. Thanks for being here. I'm really happy to see Microsoft here. You guys run fairly large networks. What does your network look like?
Oh, great. I'm happy to be here, and it's a pleasure for Microsoft's engaging much more broadly in the OCP community. I mean, our data centers are very large, and scale is perhaps the largest challenge that we face. We're hosting over 1 million servers now, growing rapidly. And focusing particularly on that fabric inside of our data centers, we're going to be building architectures that are fat tree or cloth for the foreseeable future, basically because it lets us scale out capacity as we need it. But that scale comes with a lot of cost as well. So for example, we're going to be looking at technologies that will help us reduce the fiber plant that we need, get more information over each set of fibers. We're also going to be looking at ways to speed the scale of our deployments. We have to be able to get devices out, get them deployed, brought up quickly, find any errors in that cabling, and get those fixed as fast as possible. And that's also where sort of the management software comes in. We basically need the ability to manage these switches like we manage servers today. So we have lots of great infrastructure that's out there enabling us to deploy and update portions of services on a rapid basis. We need to be updating the management software for our network fabric at the same kind of speed and agility.
Okay. Matthew, you run a fairly large network as well, slightly different sets of problems. Does that sort of, can you relate to the same set of problems, or what are your set of things that you're worrying about?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have subtly different challenges. You know, we certainly have scale as well, but not scale to the degree that Microsoft has. Well, we certainly have a lot of complexity in our environment. And complexity for really 2 reasons. First of all, we built our environment over the last 30 years, so our network sort of has various degrees of technology in it. And what we end up with is many different management planes that sit in there. And then we have other complexity because of security requirements. So we have pretty complex policy management and requirements to manage both security, filtering, routing, et cetera, around that. And so this all leads to enormous amount of difference in how we try to manage different layers. And so for us, the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity is really to get to a place where these management planes are more common. And we think a lot of it is, as this moves into software and ability to disaggregate in the network the forwarding plane from the control plane and really have common ways of doing control, then we can start building common management infrastructure that allows us a lot simpler, not just us, but the whole ecosystem, allows us to get rid of a lot of this complexity. Because right now we end up with a lot of people doing a lot of different things to allow the controls to go through properly.
Right. So I want to cover how we solve some of these, but I also want to hear sort of, Martin, your point of view. You talk to a lot of enterprise customers being part of VMware and driving some of those conversations. What do you hear as the network should look like in 5 years?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, whenever we talk about the new network, I think a lot of times we talk about this existential threat that's out there or this existential change. And like, I actually believe if we view the industry like Darwin has already spoken. Like, it's already played out. It's just played out in a certain market segment, and now we have to find out kind of how we bring the rest of the world along. So if you zoom out enough and you look at like these large data centers, like what's the biggest trend that's happened over the last decade? And we've seen the physical network become very simple, and functionality has been migrating to software at the edge in some form, right? You know, I mean, things that have been like classic network problems, like detecting heavy hitters by looking into the TCP send buffer, or maybe injecting jitter or pacing to solve incast problems, or putting security at the application layer because there's semantics. I mean, you know, the largest, most successful data centers on the planet build things this way, and like operations are better, and capital expenditure is better, and innovation speeds are better, semantics are richer. So this is a great model for building data centers. And so as the rest of the world catches on and tries to achieve these types of gains, there's a question of, you know, like what's the right migration path? And I think in many ways, I mean, if you have new applications, you put the software in the application. If you control the platform itself will assume some of these. And for others, there are software layers that are emerging which basically do the arbitrage between like the old way networks look and the new way that they are very simple. So it provides that functionality. So I think we kind of know what like the future networks look like. We have these proof points. We can actually go measure how awesome they are, and they're awesome. And now it's just coming up with these migration paths. And so for the enterprise, it is, you know, how do you get these networks that are much simpler to look like these old networks but provide the same benefits? And I do think it's software layer at the edge to do it.
Right. So the problem seems to be the complexity, the manageability, visibility, things of that nature. JR, you guys are building a bunch of solutions. What do you feel like in terms of getting to those type of solutions? How do we get there? What are the components, or how do we make this happen?
Right. So I think at a fundamental layer, you know, if someone puts a piece of hardware into the data center, they should own that hardware, and they should be able to put whatever software runs on it, on that platform. And so that seems like a reasonably simple statement, but it's not the way it works today in a lot of the industry, whether it's, you know, storage or the network. The mega scales all work that way, right? Or not all, most of them work that way. A few of them are getting there, but most of them work that way. Which gives them the ability to optimize where they position functionality, how interfaces work for operations. So, you know, back to Martin's point, and to some degree both, you know, Dave and Matthew's point as well, that operational efficiency is really what drives the bottom line. Why do I make this decision? How do I make an application's cost, the cost of developing, maintaining, and exploiting an application go down, right? Some of it's capacity, some of it's affordability, and some of it is ease of use.
So what I'm hearing is put it in software, right? I also hear a lot from a bunch of folks that, hey, Facebook or Microsoft or large software shops can do that. What about the regular enterprises? Your point of view in terms of, do you guys feel like that's the right way to go for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think just, and Martin made the point, you know, that it's all happening in software. You know, if you look upon compute and how compute evolved, where we were a long time ago on very compressed and fully owned stacks, the fact that we migrate over time to an open architecture that allowed that flexibility is really important. And we believe the same thing is required in networking, because it allows us as customers to really influence, and customers, community, vendors, we all work in an ecosystem, we can influence that architecture. And by moving into software, it allows us to both write to it, allows us to consume more openly and influence it. So we think the disaggregation part is a really key item. And back to JR's point as well, is, you know, ultimately we want that flexibility of running the functionality we need on the hardware that we procure.
Right. So, but Martin, do you think the enterprises are there to be able to sort of take advantage of this?
Well, I mean, this is actually a very interesting question. I think like I was very naive early on. I thought, you know, what's really hard to change is hardware, and so we should focus on having more flexible hardware. And like I think now, maybe 7 years later, and hundreds of customer visits and working on this, like probably the most inflexible thing in industry are like people's brains and, and like seriously, like organizational structure. And so, I mean, I do believe that as an incumbent on us as a community is to create solutions that look like the solutions used to look before. Because if you don't do that, not only does tooling not work and applications not work, but like people don't know how to deal with it. And I think it's that difference, that delta that we have to bridge as certainly a vendor community to help those that aren't used to these new models of doing things. So I think we have the model of how to build the architecture. I think many of the leading guys, like for example, you know, Matt with Goldman Sachs can build these things on their own, rebuild their applications and so forth. But I mean, as you go kind of down market, you're going to have more tools to help do this, not because of core technology or even operational practice, but like how people are used to dealing with these things. And so that's kind of the arbitrage to me. That's kind of the area where we need to focus on. Yeah.
So what you seem to be pointing at is building an ecosystem where vendors do have this opportunity to build an ecosystem to provide that base tool set that enterprises can use. There will be people like Microsoft will build it themselves, but there's plenty of enterprises that actually need that support level. Right. So from an enterprise point of view, is that sort of what you're looking at, JR?
Yeah, the same thing, and it's true of hardware and software. If you remember back to Frank's keynote, he talked about the congestion point that can sometimes occur in vendors, and you know, Open Compute is striving really hard to kind of open that up and make many pathways to get from a technology provider into a customer's hands. And I think what you see is solutions that are tailor-fit to different segments of the market. It might be that, you know, Martin drew a picture in everybody's minds of a data center operational paradigm. And let's say that Martin's picture is called X. Well, Dave might have Y picture of it. The fact that a customer can take either of those two, purchase some hardware from a set of providers, install it according to their hardware requirements, and apply either X or Y to that infrastructure is huge, right? Because then it deals with the issue that Martin was bringing up, which is what's the right operational paradigm for my organization, not for the world, for my organization, and how do we create ecosystems that are able to fulfill all the variants?
Right, right. So I want to spend a little bit of time on what are the specifics that we should do, or maybe even an OCP context, or what can OCP do, and how do we drive building that ecosystem so we actually build these sort of layers of abstraction that different companies with different capabilities can use the components or the disaggregated pieces that are available and build a solution for themselves. So Dave, you want to start on where you think we should be doing?
Well, the first thing we need the ability to do is to actually run services on the network devices themselves. That's sort of the entry point. And we need the ability to manage those services so that when they fail, which they will, we can use all of our service health monitoring and management to get the network back to healthiness. Actually, going back to a point that was brought up before, I mean, even a lot of my best network engineers these days want to write code. You know, there might be differences in their ability. You know, one's a Python scripter, the other one's a full hacker. But the set of people who are able to write code that could control these devices is continuing to expand, and I think that's going to continue going on into the future. And so it's really creating a platform on which those people can work. Through OCP, what I'm hoping to do is get some standardization across these platforms so that as hardware evolves generation to generation, or even from device vendor to device vendor, we can reuse the intellectual property or the skills, the tooling that we've built in those services that are running on our devices. And there'll probably be some commonality, services that might run on my devices, Matthew devices that would be the same, potentially even sharing the same code bases, and ones that'll be specialized to his environment and in my environment. And that's the kind of ecosystem that we need to build and support.
So does that point to a sort of a operating system or a common platform that we built on top of?
Yeah, I don't know if it's an operating system or I guess the term I'd use is common abstraction layer. Now, how we implement it is implemented through an operating system, is implemented through you know, an API. So I think is implementation detail that we need to get to, but certainly a common abstraction layer to say, when I want to execute this service, let's say something as simple as create a VLAN, I can do so consistently across the different hardware layers. And then as those services evolve, we start with the base service that evolve on top of that. I think we end up in a place where now we can truly write very interesting applications that control end-to-end because they have a common entry point into the network across many different devices. Right. And that allows us to then deal with higher order service, which ultimately is what we want to get to.
Yeah, I want to, if you don't mind, I'd like to take a slightly different slant at that, which is you just epitomized Martine's earlier statement. Sometimes the most inflexible part is people's minds. For instance, you talked about multiple suppliers giving you the same common API. In the existing networking world, switches, routers, and those things, they're appliances. So you're stuck. If I buy it from vendor X, I get their view of the world. If you just bought that hardware and you could put any software on it, you actually don't need the normalization that you're talking about, because you could go back through and say, I like, operating system or operational software, Z, and I'm going to run it everywhere because I own that hardware.
Yeah, I actually, I think from there are many different ways to get it. I think ultimately, I think the most important thing is that we have an ability to run a common abstraction, whatever that is. So
common
for us,
operational practice, right?
For us, that might be one way. For Microsoft, another. But I think that's ultimately, and I think that's where the community can fundamentally help. Yeah.
And what another piece to that is a little bit kind of lower down in the stack, which is today that choke point that people get to. Sometimes it's like pieces of technology. Sometimes it's really just the brand on the front. Right. If you look at optical modules today, I talk to customers all the time, and I ask them, why aren't you running 40 gig as your infrastructure? And they go, oh, it's way too expensive. And I'm like, okay, not really. And they go, yeah, it is. And they show me the price list that they might see from their current providers. And I say, if you went straight to the people that actually manufacture this and you buy it from them, this is what your pricing would look like. They go, wow, if I looked like that, I would be running 40 gig infrastructure. Right? And so what I'm kind of getting at is on the OCP side, one of the benefits here is the kind of the technology providers, the true technology providers could step up and get this through to customers. And customers should start asking that. They should start looking at every component and saying, why am I buying it through the channel I'm buying it from? Is there a value that gets added? Or can I get a better system if I go the other way?
That's a really awesome point, because I think that's the value that OCP provides, is where specific solution providers can provide the best solution possible at the right prices for solving a specific problem, and you don't have to buy a vertically integrated solution set that may or may not be what you exactly want and may not be the cost points you want. So the idea is to disaggregate and then be able to provide that solution. Martine's itching to jump into this conversation, so go for it.
Right.
I want to go.
So I think 5 years ago I was a lot more pessimistic about the networking industry. It just kind of made me feel kind of a little sick, and it just felt like a little unhealthy. And now, I'm so optimistic.
$1.2 billion later.
Let's not go
totally
there.
independent of the acquisition. No, I'm actually very optimistic. And before I thought there's a lot of work that we have to do to kind of unnaturally bias and skew things, and we have to do panels and talk about all this stuff and so forth. But I think we've come far enough along that it's more about education and pointing out the examples than it is us having to spend a lot of hard work. And I really believe the industry is going to do the right thing. I really believe all the forces there, and market forces and Darwin, and everything's going to come to play, and we're going to end up with better networks. And so if I was going to do something prescriptive, okay, walking away with this, what should we do as a community to increase the adoption? I would actually say it's education. Go stand up a data center in the new model, build an L3 ECMP fabric from whatever vendor you want, run new software at the edge, look at how awesome it is, and use that as the model. And you say, okay, so I've got this wiring closet, or I've got this mini data center sitting in a closet. I know how efficient it is. I know the OpEx. I know the CapEx. And I'm going to compare this against every networking vendor that walks in. And that's it. That's your bar. And then going forward, if they can't achieve the same types of things you're getting there, you should ask questions, real questions. And it's all there now. I mean, before, these things didn't exist. The proof points weren't there. They were hidden, and it's all there now. So I really would encourage everybody to do this.
There you have it.
Well, I mean, he's right. We see that happen all the time with customers. They go through exactly the analysis that Martine articulated, and they come out after the fact and say, why didn't I do this before? And then you have to explain to them why historically they may not have been able to get there, but they look at it and say, wow, I really needed this.
Yeah, I think, and if I wanted to chime in, I felt the same way 9 months ago when we started this OCP network project. Didn't really have a good feel of how much support or where this is going to go. but the number of people who want to participate and jump in, or just the agreement across the board on what needs to get done has been really refreshing to see. So I'm really, really excited about it. I do want to touch one more quick thing, we're sort of running out of time, is skill set in the network industry, especially for Dave and Matthew, where you guys go and hire network engineers that are traditional. Are you seeing that shift? You touched a little bit that your network engineers want to write code.
Absolutely.
How do you drive that?
You know, there's a large talent pool of people out there who are excellent developers. There's a pretty large talent pool out there who understand networking and networking concepts, those fundamentals. The intersection of that is still too small today. We have a hard time finding great people with those intersecting talent sets, but that pool is growing. And we found that, you know, you can often pair great developers with great network engineers to get a good team that together can build these.
Same thing. I mean, we're shifting a lot. You know, historically, we're hiring a lot of pure network engineers. Now it's a blend of software developers and engineers, and gradually finding people that are great network engineers, also great software developers. And so that's a really exciting shift. And it's not just in networking and storage, et cetera, but we're seeing that talent pool shift. But it's taking time.
Awesome. Well, I wish we had like 30 more minutes because we could go on forever. It's a really fun topic. Thank you so much for taking the time. Appreciate the insights.
Great.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Thanks, JR. Thanks. Good to meet you. Thanks. Good job, man. All right, awesome. You know, I heard a saying once that there's margin in mystery, and so I tend to agree with Martin that the more we demystify things and educate, the more we can look for those margins. And I'm not just talking about profit margins, right? There's performance margins, there's operational efficiency margins. We need to look for those margins everywhere around us, challenge those margins, and figure out how to make it better. So love the fact that we're coming together, demystifying this space, educating each other on how we can do things better. I'm going to wrap up very, very quickly here. Don't forget to go see our sponsors in the expo hall. There's still a lot of really cool stuff on display. I know I personally was not able to see everything last night due to a dancing penguin that was getting in the way every once in a while. But we also have a hardware hackathon going on right now. We're going to reassemble back here at 2:30. So please, if everybody could come back at 2:30. We're going to do some recognition. We're going to announce hackathon winners. We're going to have a readout from all of our project leads from the engineering workshops that have been going on since yesterday. And then we'll wrap up from 2:30 to 3:30. So I expect to see everybody back here at 2:30. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.